Welcome to CPA Australia's Managing Cyber and Data Protection Risks live webinar. Presenting today, we're joined by our panel of presenters, Greg Lewis, Dr. Micheal Axelsen, and Drew Fenton. Supporting the chat box for the questions will be Madeline Savos and Michelle Webb. I'd like to introduce our chair for today's webinar. Our chair for today's webinar will be Gavin Ord. Gavin is a Business Investment Policy Manager in CPA Australia. I'll now hand over to you, Gavin. You've got controls now and you are unmuted.
Thank you, Arjun, and thank you for everybody for joining today's webinar on managing cyber and data protection risk. So as Arjun has said, today we have a panel of experts presenting on this topic, and they are a very credible and very high quality panel of experts. I can vouch for that. First presenter is Greg Lewis, and Greg is a board member of the Tax Practitioners Board. He was appointed to the board in December 2015 and was reappointed in February 2019. And during that time, he's acted as chair on a number of occasions. Greg is also a tax advisor himself, and among other roles across his career, and was a partner at KPMG and an advisor to Minter Ellison. And Greg is a regular at these CPA Australia webinars and definitely a friend of CPA Australia and a friend of the profession. The second presenter is Micheal Axelsen. Micheal is a fellow of CPA Australia and a senior lecturer in business information systems at the University of Queensland. He regularly partners with CPA Australia to educate members about IT management, cyber and data protection. He's also authored several publications through CPA Australia and was a member of CPA Australia's IT Centre of Excellence. Prior to academia, Micheal was also in practice himself with BDOs in Brisbane. The third presenter today is Drew Fenton. Drew is also a CPA and is the Managing Director of Fenton Green and has over 35 years experience in professional indemnity insurance. Drew has a wealth of knowledge on accountants insurance and claims management and partners with CPA Australia in the provision of risk management education. And I can also vouch that Drew is incredibly knowledgeable on professional indemnity insurance issues. Sorry. And here's for the agenda for today. So first up, Greg will be talking about protecting your practice and the Code of Professional Conduct, which is under the Tax Agent Services Act. That'll be followed by Micheal, who will be giving some practical tips to manage cyber and data protection risks. And we'll conclude with a presentation by Drew on some war stories, cyber security claims, case studies, and cyber liability insurance, which is becoming more and more important. After that, there'll be a panel Q&A, and I encourage you to please enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them either during the presentations or during the Q&A session. So I'd like to now pass over to Greg from the Tax Practitioners Board to talk about protecting your practice. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Gavin, and welcome to fellow presenters and, importantly, all of the listeners to today's webinar. Can I just firstly thank CPA for the opportunity to present here today. And as Gavin knows, I've known Gavin for a number of years. We find these sessions absolutely outstanding for us to communicate our messages out to the profession. Joining me today is Madeline Savos. Welcome, Maddie. Maddie is a fellow Melburnian, so I hope you're well, Maddie. Maddie's online to take any questions. Maddie is a senior advisor in policy within the TPB, so I highly encourage you to punch out questions. Love to see them come through. Can I just pass my thoughts out to everybody on the call today? These are extraordinary times for all of us in public practice and also in our personal lives, so I hope everybody is well, and if you've got people who are unwell, my thoughts go out to you, and also the thoughts from the board go out to you all. So hang in there. We're all in this together, and this sort of is a good segue into sort of my introduction. The board is highly cognizant of the pressure being placed upon all practitioners We are doing what we can within our remit to assist practitioners, and I think today is one part of that. This education on topics of relevance that is impacting or will be impacting your practice and your clients is part of our role. We see that as being very important. And I think cyber, it goes without saying, cyber is absolutely really important in this current environment. So today I'm going to focus on your obligations as a practitioner. And for those of you who've heard me speak, I always talk about the Code of Conduct, and it's legislated under the Tax Agent Services Act. We'll talk about that, but we'll give it some real life around some case studies and what it actually means. So you've got some practical tips to take away to your practice, but also practical tips where you can probably go and talk to your clients, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all in this for, is having strong businesses and practices to advise our clients. Just on a little bit of background here, I think we all need to recognise where you're registered with the board, that essentially, this is coming from my notes here, that you are agents of government services, and we all have access to personal information, whether that be on personal clients, whether that be with your staff, or with also your the legal entities that you manage on behalf of your clients. So in reality, it's valuable information, and it makes all of us a target for cyber criminals. Highly important to remember. So if your data is lost or compromised, unfortunately it can be very costly to recover, if at all. One message I wanted to highlight here is that the Australian Cyber Security Centre, or in normal speak ACSC, has advised the Australian government that they are currently aware of and responding to the targeting of various Australian government and businesses by sophisticated state-based actor. And we've all seen that in the press, and that is continuing on, so I wanted to relay that message out there. So in that context, it is imperative that all of us on this call today, our clients in particular, are alert to this threat. And we also importantly don't become fearful of it, but we take considered steps to enhance your resilience of your business and also your clients' businesses. Really, really important. So what I thought I'd like to do is, everybody talks about cyber attacks. Let's talk about what exactly are they and what form can they take, and what can happen as a result of those attacks. And then I'll talk through the code to give some practicality. Now I'm driving the screen here, so this could be very interesting. So I've got that to work. That's good, Arjun. So when I go on to what is a cyber attack, previous slide, there was the practice. What is a cyber attack? So in essence, to keep it simple, it's an attempted or actual incident that either uses computers to commit a crime, or in reality, it's an attack directed at a computer or computer systems. And a good example of that is a denial of service attack, where websites might get overwhelmed by particular people and they deny services to people who require those services. So that's it in short. It's no more complicated than that. So let's look at the types of cyber crimes. So there are a number of different types of cyber crimes, and some of the most common types, and we've got them on the screen here, we've listed them, and it doesn't profess to be exhaustive, but I think it gives a good start. So you've got hacking, which we're all aware of, online scams and fraud, which we're all generally aware of, identity theft, some of us are aware of it, and definitely if you've been subject to identity theft, attacks on computer systems, so that may well be where there's been a denial of service or where your systems have been locked up and you've been held to ransom. Email spam and phishing. We've all seen the emails that try to purport to be someone who they're actually not. And then the other one, which doesn't get a lot of mention, is illegal or prohibited online content. And that's very important. I think I mentioned that today. While I'm on that topic, I'd like to share some information that's actually we've sourced from the ACSC, and I just want to go through it just for a moment or two. They've seen over the last number of months, especially in the COVID environment, an exponential increase in the reporting of phishing scams, and it's not spelt with an F, it's P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G, and all sorts of, I had to use the term, lures to try to trick people into opening an email or handing over personal detail. This is, and I've seen them myself, even seen them come to my computer, not a TVV computer, but other a personal computer I've got. So I've seen them. I think we've all seen them. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of things. A phishing message is commonly sent out to generally just thousands of people, and it's a sort of a generic, let's see who we can catch. Then there's the ones which, again, these are corny terms, but it's called spear phishing, where it's a targeted campaign, i.e. the term spear phishing, and it's typically aimed at a group of recipients. It could well be tax agents, BAS agents, or tax financial advisors. And these agents that are looking for, or cyber actors looking for information, they will target particular people with particular scams to get targeted information. And the ACSC has seen a number of phishing emails that in essence feature government logos. And I won't mention some of those, but there's a number of them, high profile government logos, and branding of organisations where people try to purport to be someone who they're actually not. But by virtue of the branding, the logo, the email address, they convince the recipient that they're actually legitimate. And some of them are actually quite good. I've seen a couple of them. They do put a lot of effort into them. Just an interesting stat, which I'm going to read out, which I found interesting. The government Scam Watch has received over 3,000 coronavirus-themed scam reports, and with over $1.3 million in reported losses. Anecdotally, I'd have to say I suspect that's probably a low number. It's probably only those that are, as I've said, are reported losses. Some people may well be subject that don't want to report through sheer embarrassment, which is not good. So I think one of the key messages here is we must be aware and be vigilant within our practices and also with the clients about receiving messages that seem suspicious. If it is suspicious, you need to think about how to deal with it. And I think if you're looking for help to spot a fake email or even a text message, I've seen some great ones on my SMS come through. You know, you've won the lottery or you've done this, but you need to provide details. The ACSC has got some really good information and some good cheat sheets. So if within your practice you're not aware, go onto a site and it's called cyber, cyber.gov.au. I highly recommend you go on there and inform your staff around that particular space if you don't have particular policies. Let's go on to the next slide. And I think I've spoken about what is cybercrime, look at some of the types of cyber attack. Now, the reason we focus on it is because as a result of this, we suffer a loss or potential loss from a cyber attack. And I'd like to go through that in a little bit of detail and what it actually means, because I think for many people, the seriousness of a cyber attack can have a major impact on their practice and, more importantly, potentially have a major impact on their clients. And that's a really, really serious issue. It goes to your reputation of your practice, and more importantly, it could be losses for your clients also. So there's what we term first-party losses, which are those affecting the tax practitioner or the BAS practitioner or the TFA. And there are those that we term the third-party losses, those affecting other parties, i.e. clients, per se. So the first piece which I'll unpack is the first-party losses. And that's when you, so I'm talking to you today on the webinar, you're in a practice, you're out in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne, and you've a couple of partners, you've got 10 staff, and you've got a policy, and you suffer a loss from a cyber attack. You've been subject to an attack, and the losses could well be very simply business interruption loss. Computers are down for 2 days. The cost of repairing and restoring systems, that can be very expensive from some examples I've seen. Or you're having to upgrade your cyber security as a result of it. And one which I like to always mention is reputational damage. What price do you put on your practice being subject to an attack, in particular from cyber, and access to client information being made available to a third-party actor? Your clients wouldn't consider that to be very favourable. And I think the reputational damage is really, really important, and that you understand sometimes you may have to invest a little bit of money in cyber security, but the payback, I think, is really, it's enormous. Last but not least, extortion costs. We've all heard of the classics, we'll lock your computer, you pay us $50,000 or $100,000, and then we'll hand back the key to you, and you can actually unlock the lock, and you can use your computer system. So that's the first party losses. Then let's go to the next part, which is third party losses from a cyber attack. And that's when you can be held liable to a client for a cyber attack. So this can be liability and negligence for failing to properly protect client information, civil liability, and then fines imposed by regulators such as ASIC on companies or individual directors. So that's pretty important. Let's go on, and I think it's where the rubber hits the road in the presentation is, and I'm just trying to move my slide down, Arjun, for some reason I won't let me move it down. Just trying to see if I can move it down here.
Which slide are you wanting to go to? Just the next one?
Just the next one, yeah. First part, yeah. No, third, go
there you go, done it for you.
Go to the next one. Next one, if you could, please.
Yep.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'm just having trouble with my mouse. The mouse has got coronavirus. All right, so what are the obligations as a registered tax practitioner? So it's pretty simple, and I'll keep it that simple and we'll make some practical applications. So code of conduct, we're one of the professions that has a legislated code of conduct under the Tax Agent Services Act, which Gavin mentioned earlier. All practitioners that are registered with the board must abide by the code. Very simple. One of the code items that's important in the cyberspace is code item 6. And it's particularly relevant to this discussion because it relates to confidentiality of client information. And that goes to the heart of a cyber attack, accessing information that's important and valuable. Let's look at the consequences of a cyber attack in terms of code item 6. And then I'll explore a couple of the other code items. And my mouse is working. Excellent. Code item 6. So one of the things that I think is really important here is that code item 6 is very simple. You must not disclose any information relating to a client's affairs to a third party. Very simple. Unless you've obtained their permission, it should be in writing, could also be via an email, or where there's a legal duty to do so. Could well be where the board, Tax Practitioners Board, issues your notice under 6100, and we have a power to request particular information. That could be an example. Where a breach of confidentiality occurs as a result of a cyber attack, we would need to consider what type of IT controls are in place to determine what administrative sanctions, if any, should be imposed on a practitioner. I'll leave this to one of the experts on the panel here today, Dr. Micheal Axelsen from CPA, to go through more detail around adequate controls. We'll leave that to the expert. But from the board's perspective, some of the things would indicate best practice for us when considering a case are, do you have and have you installed antivirus software? Do you deploy firewalls? Do you have the latest security patches, etc.? Do you regularly change passwords? Do you have second form of authentication? So really, really important, but important I'd like to highlight here in the context of code item 6, we consider each case on its merits and we'll always deal with it on a fact-by-fact basis. It never changes. Let's go. Oh, my mouse is really doing some strange things here. Code item 7. In addition to the code I just spoke about, let's have a look at code item 7. So you must ensure that a service that you provide as a practitioner is provided competently on your behalf. So from the board's perspective, determining whether a practitioner has complied with their obligations under this code, it's really a question of fact. We'll look at each case, consider it on its merits. We'll look at have sufficient IT controls been put in place. So I think it's really important that you listen to the next presenter in terms of that context, because they're things that we will take into account. And that context goes to whether or not we would consider whether or not someone has been reckless in their approach to dealing with cyber security and determining whether they may have breached the code. Again, it's a fact-by-fact case. So let's go and have a look at a case study. Moving on to sanctions, we always have this 4 things. So if you haven't taken the appropriate steps to prevent a cyber attack, then the reality is if you are investigated and we follow due process and we find that a sanction can be imposed, there's a number of sanctions the board can impose. The first one is a written caution, maybe just a basic warning. Second one is an order requiring you to do certain things. Could well be you have to go and do a course in education, maybe in IT security. You can end up having your registration suspended for a period. And last but not least, you could have your suspension terminated, which could be have serious consequences for you and your practice. So when we look at the cases, we look at them on their merits, we do it on a fact-by-fact basis, but importantly, we will look at whether or not the practitioner has taken reasonable steps to ensure that they've got sufficient IT controls in place. And also, was the practitioner reckless in their approach to cyber security? I'll let Michael talk more about that. and also about the notifiable data breaches scheme, because that's something very important for practitioners to be aware of. What to do in the event of a data breach, and I'm just going to touch on this, very mindful of time. So you should contact the ATO. Importantly, you should advise any of your affected clients. Contact your software provider. Take steps to secure the information, very important. Last but not least, contact the Office of the Australian Information Commission. And I recommend you go onto their website to get some assistance on what you may need to consider in that regard. Let's look at where to get help. So where to get help? A couple of numbers here. I think you should keep these. In the event of a data breach, contact the ATO on the number that I've got up there on the slide. Contact, if you need to, get some details from the TPB's website, and I've got that up there, /protect your practice. Subscribe to our e-news. I think that's important to keep up to date with regular events and updates. Very, very important, I would say to practitioners here today, go and have a look at the OIAC website. A lot of people haven't when I go out and do presentations. Highly recommend it. It's worthwhile the investment of time. Last but not least, professional indemnity insurance. And it's not last but not least, but it's just how my slide pack's gone. But just want to touch briefly on, as registered practitioners with the board, you all must have minimum standards of professional indemnity insurance. And that's very, very important. And I'll let you go onto our website if you want to get more details. It's really important because when it comes to a cyber attack, there may well be a loss. And at the end of the day, you may need PI insurance to cover it. However, you need to strongly look at, and I strongly recommend you look at your policy to see if you're covered or not. Some policies only cover you for certain types of losses. So some may cover you only for third-party losses. They may not cover you for a first-party loss in that regard. So generally, some of the cyber attacks don't have a direct connection to the provision of professional services, but generally that's the link that's made by a practitioner with regards to a PI claim. But a lot of policies, and we'll let Dean talk about that a little bit more, are first-party losses covered to your business. You really need to check your policy in that regard. That's just an overarching comment from myself. Have a look at a PI insurance example before I close up. So again, very small example. Company had 2 million turnover with 8 employees. Not an unusual set of circumstances for a public practice. The server and client records were locked by ransomware. That's unfortunately becoming a little bit more common for some people. And the company was only able to get their files released after paying a ransom of $50,000 to hackers. The company's insurance policy covered the attack. The policy paid them not just the extortion costs of $50, but they paid $150 to cover loss of income, the ransom demand, consultant costs to fix up and probably upgrade security, and cost to restore the network. So just remember, it's not just the $50,000 cost. I think that's a lot of people seem to miss that. CPA, I'd just like to highlight here very briefly that the board recognises cyber security awareness training. You only can look at today. We're all looking at things digitally. All of our practices are run digitally. So the board recognises where it's done by a relevant and professional provider, and if they have suitable qualifications and practical experience, we will recognise the time, i.e. today's webinar would be recognised. Just to like to make you aware, those that are registered tax agents, you need to complete 90 hours of CPE with a minimum of 10 years each year. There are some concessions given for this year. TFAs, 60 hours of CPE over a triennium with a minimum of 7, and BAS agents, 45 over the triennium with a minimum of 5. Again, we have some concessions this year which you can find on our website. My mouse is really doesn't like me here today. Staying in touch, everybody. Again, if you're looking for any details, please contact us on our website. If you'd like to talk to a human being, and we have a lot of great people within our organisation, don't hesitate to call us, 1300 362 829. And if you have questions, please punch them through. Maddie or myself will be very happy to answer. Back to you, Gavin, or I might actually, I'm not sure if I'm handing you, Gavin, or straight onto Michael, but I'll let you drive that, Gavin.
Thanks, Greg. And now we'll pass over to Micheal Axelsen, who will give you some tips and tricks around cyber. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, so you should be able to hear me now. If you can't, yell at me. So there are a few things that were in Greg's presentation, things like sheer embarrassment and about having been hacked and all that kind of thing. What I'm left with is you've got to be really careful if you are caught out with your data having been lost, because there's particularly the notifiable data breach scheme that comes into play. So that's a legal thing. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a CPA, a humble CPA at that. And there are a few things though that you can do in terms of managing cyber and understanding the risks that you're facing. So the first thing that's important to understand, I'm seeing some questions coming through. Some of them want technical solutions, and technical solutions are definitely part of it. But you are left with the fact that IT risk is a business risk. You can't just hand it over to the IT people, you know, the people with propeller head caps. I've been one of those, so I can say that. You can't leave it to the IT people. You need the IT to do its job, and if it's not available, then we can't do our jobs and we can't run our businesses. And one thing we are concerned about, particularly from a cyber protection perspective, is making sure that data only goes to the right people, the authorised people. One thing that often happens is not so much your IT that screws up as where the people you work with, if their security is a problem. So that can be a big drama. You might have a supplier, service delivery, a subcontractor, and their data security isn't up to scratch. So all of these things can result in cyber risk, data protection breaches. And you need to understand some things such as what data have I got to lose and where is it kept and how is it kept. Greg's already given a discussion around cyber attack, and these are some more technical ones. Denial of service attacks is a cyber attack. It may not result in lost data, but it means that you actually aren't able to access your system, so it's a cyber attack. Inside attacks, hopefully we're all beyond the world where you sack somebody but you don't remove their user account, you don't change their password. You shouldn't have live passwords that are open, yet whenever I've done a review in the past, you go into a company and they have passwords that haven't been changed. You know, Barry left 6 months ago, his username and password is still open. Now that was, you know, not too bad when your data and your IT was an island, but now that you're connected to the internet, remote desktop, people can access your data, they can access this via phone, tablet, whatever we've got. So where I'm saying is you need to make sure you've turned off all those people, those users that are no longer active. You need to get rid of them off your authorization list, because if you don't, the internet is very unforgiving. And so you can have attacks from people who have left, or they compromise that information and can attack you. There is malware, bad software that does bad things. You might get an email saying, look, you know, click here for pictures of Scarlett Johansson. It's never Scarlett Johansson. It never is. It's always some form of malware that's being loaded onto your computer. It's a screensaver. It might be a Game of Thrones screensaver or something that's currently popular. I don't know what's cool anymore. I'm a university lecturer. But if there's something that's cool and you let your children play with the laptop, this happens far too often, and they download a screensaver and then there's some malware that's downloaded. Password attacks use unique, strong, hard to steal passwords. Later I'll talk about May and June. There were 17 billion records lost in May and June, and one of those was to do with a Twitter password that was far too easily guessed, right? So that can be guessed by using a brute force attack. You just have a library of passwords, or you just throw the whole dictionary. Computers are really fast these days, so you just chuck every password in the dictionary, you're going to get somebody. And of course, for $25.97, You can have a keylogger attack, which is a real problem if you've got, say, a publicly accessible computer. Let's say you have a receptionist and they leave their desk for a second. This keylogger can be added to the computer, and every keystroke that's used is logged into that keylogger. And it's, you know, the passwords will be caught, but so will private information, emails, that kind of thing. You can end up with data that's lost into the wild, but you can lose a reputation. You end up with some legal liability. So someone might be able to sue you as a normal civil procedure. But PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, if you have credit cards that you take payments with, PCI DSS is something you agreed to follow. And if you lose your data, if the credit card data is lost, that's going to have a mammoth problem because clients can no longer use credit cards to pay. You'll have that merchant facility revoked. And we, of course, have the Privacy Act 1988, which is where we talk about the privacy principles, but also the notifiable data breaches scheme and business interruption. We've talked about that already and will come up in the insurance. Now, cybersecurity, we can't really be 100% risk-free. I'm pretty sure we're mostly aware of this, but if I have my data sitting on a server in a lead box that I have 3-layer locks to get to, it's not very accessible, but it would be completely risk-free. Well, almost completely risk-free. So it's a balancing act. There's an implication, can I protect myself 100%? Answer is you probably can't protect yourself 100%. What you can do is make your place harder to attack so that people move on to the next easier target. And fortunately or unfortunately, there are loads of those. It's been around a while. The history of hacking goes back to 1903, and then we've got the Apple II, the AIDS ransomware in '89, WannaCry in 2017. So we've moved from 1 or 2 computers through to things like 230,000 computers being attacked in a single day in 150 countries. Now, things like WannaCry, the trouble with WannaCry is it's really not that effective. Why? Because it affected people so quickly. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to be a slow, insidious attack. Because people noticed it, it wasn't as effective as it might have otherwise been. So your more effective cyber attacks tend to be things that move slowly and encrypt your files very slowly. That's normally the ransomware model. And you don't know that it's attacked until it's too late. Your backups are corrupted or encrypted, and you really have to pay, as Greg's example showed, you have to pay or you won't get your data. If you don't have your data, you don't have a business. There were 15 billion records breached in May, June of this year. In July, they were very happy. There was only 77 million records lost. So yay for that. The main ones in May, June, in case you're interested, there was a Thai telephone company that had its records all stolen. I think that was 7 billion records alone. And then, if you recall, there was also the Twitter hack where people compromised people's Twitter accounts, like Barack Obama, etc., where it said, send me your bank account details, or send me $1,000 and I'll send you back all this Bitcoin. People fall for that. People are silly, but that's why spear phishing works. We're not using PowerPoint. People, process, and technology, and I've just said that people do silly things. Really the main point here, technology isn't going to solve your problem. You can spend an awful lot of money on the technology, but if your people do silly things, it's not going to solve the problem, okay? Technology is not the silver bullet. You normally find you buy the technology and, you know, that's an easy fix because you get a salesman who comes to you and says, this technology will solve all your problems. It never does, by the way. But what you end up with is a great bit of technology, But if your people are not clued in, they don't know how to recognize spam or phishing attacks, or they just click on things because, you know, there's a click, there's something to click on, I'm going to click on it. Hooray, it's a great screensaver. People are the ones that often, if you go digging behind those 15 billion records, people who make bad choices around passwords or where to share information, that's where problems start happening. But processes, if you haven't thought about what you're doing or how you're doing it, your data can end up in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. I'm a little concerned about having everybody working from home during the COVID pandemic. We did everything we could to push people to work from home so that everything worked, and we needed to do that. Did we break anything when we did that? That's a bit of a concern, I think. People are the weakest link. That's all fine. We don't need to talk any more than that. Who's at risk? Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here. There's an implication, if you grew up in the 80s like I did, that all of your hackers are cool kids with beanies and, you know, a bit of a goatee beard. People go, nowadays, it's less of a cottage industry, it's more of a business. So they target, they focus on organisations. So if you have clients that are in the health sector, right? If you go to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, they'll tell you that the top 5 are health, service providers, finance, particularly superannuation funds, education, insurance, and legal, accounting and management services. So if your clients are in that space, they're at risk of cyber attack. Why? People attack those industries because that's where the money is, and particularly the health sector. If you go to an aged care home, you'll see that there's a lot of people who don't go out partying very much, but there's a lot of data about people in the aged care home. There might be their payment details, their identity details. They're a strong target for identity theft, and the patients often take a long time to figure out that they've been compromised, right? So health service providers are very much on this list of targets. Particularly too, they don't have a lot of great IT. Often they don't have IT. They don't have a lot of people with great IT skills, and they don't secure their files particularly well. They don't have strong IT practices. They're using old versions of Windows because we don't have any money to update. Low budgets, no backups, no stopping a click on that culture. Greg pointed to the organisation that paid $50,000. So what's the holy grail of a professional service business? What we want is someone who has a, you know, they come to us to do their taxes this year and they come back next year and they come back the year after. I know that when I worked at BDO, that was what we wanted. We wanted repeat business. What's repeat business for a ransomware attacker? It's someone who has already paid the ransom once, so we're going to hit them again and again and again. And you end up on a sucker list, and we know that you've paid before, you'll probably pay again. So it's repeat business. There's a business model at play here. I worked with an aged care home, and they had been attacked 3 times in 3 months. They didn't actually pay the bill, but they were easily compromised every time because they wouldn't spend the money to get their stuff hardened. They just went back to backup, which wasn't a terrific idea, and they did not have very good IT skills. One of the problems of being in the regions. There's 2 examples here, so I've got some links there. I see there's a question there around processing work from overseas, and 2 years ago a large accounting firm hacked. I don't know if it's these ones that I've thought about, but an accounting firm with remote desktop enabled and poor passwords. So, you know, you go home or you're working from home. When you go home and you have remote desktop and you connect into work and you've got the password you always used to have, unfortunately that password is probably not strong enough. So in this case, the accounting firm had their remote desktop hacked and clients' payroll bank accounts were changed. So the payroll went to the wrong people, fraudulent changes to tax returns, super account balances, etc. Now that's, obviously there's a loss, but there's also the reputation risk. So you have to now, under the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme, would have to report that as private data that has been lost, and that's one of the things with the OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. Cyber security costs around, or incidents cost around $29 billion each year. That's the Department of Homeland Security's estimate, I think. 43% of that is targeting small business, which is a growing place for cyber attacks. And 59% of organisations have some attack that affects their cyber breach, not cyber beach, every month. Greg, I think, referred to sophisticated actors, which has become code. Now, I'm a lecturer at the University of Queensland, and we have had fairly well publicised incidents in the last couple of years here, where we've had attacks on our network from those sophisticated actors. And particularly if you're prominent, this becomes a problem. A lot of the time, though, it's weak or stolen passwords. I don't know about the toll attack. I'll have to check up on that. But the cyber security often is coming down to simple things, right? So unless you are a Toll Holdings or a University of Queensland or some prominent organisation, ransomware is that business model. We've really covered this. The data's encrypted, and unless you pay the ransom, you will not get the key. If you don't pay the ransom, they'll destroy the key. Without that key, you could decrypt your data, but it will take until about the end of the universe for you to get it back, statistically speaking. They do send you a quite reasonable charge, and in particular, your ransomware service provider has a real business model. They are providing referees now. So they'll say, hey, I attacked this person, and they've agreed to act as a referee because the ransom was paid and I gave them the data back. So this is, you know, the same as you and I going to get clients, go speak to the people I've worked with before. So they've got referees, they've got help desks if you're no good at working out how to pay in Bitcoins. Why do they like Bitcoins? Virtually untraceable. Some people say you should pay the ransom, others say you shouldn't. If you're faced with the choice of losing your business, then you've got, you know, it's a hard choice to make. You don't want to end up on the sucker list, but then again, you still want a business. Average cost $5,000 for ransomware. For a larger business, nearly $2 million. There's even, the last 12 months or so, this idea of a franchise business model. So if you want to set yourself up as a ransomware attacker, there are actually services on the dark web where they will provide you with all of the tools you need to go and become your own ransomware provider. If you can come up with a cool name, I'm sure you'll be very successful. Don't do that. It's illegal. These are the practical hints and tips. So these are all free ones. So you can certainly invest in really strong technologies, but as I've already said, it's the people link that's the problem. The ones that, so the Australian Signals Directorate, they're the spooks that keep the government secure most of the time. They've got 4 simple but essential strategies. These will work to prevent 85% of cybersecurity incidents. If you do these 4 things, 85% of attacks will fail right there. And they are application whitelisting, where you can only run on the computer the programs that are authorized. That screensaver installs software and it works. Why? Because people have their computer systems opened up. They're completely open and people don't know. What they would like to do is just be able to install software, but that's from the 1980s, right? When the PC was developed, computers did not connect to each other, at least personal computers did not. They were personal. But we have grown beyond the wildest dreams of what people thought they would happen back then. So now our computer is connected to every other computer in the organization, and it's connected to every other computer in the world through the internet. When it was a personal device, you had to physically install software yourself. I remember those days. But now it can come in via email, a web page, it might be a breach, some sort of injection attack, whatever it might happen to be. Easiest way to stop that happening is recognize that, 80% of the time, 80% of your people use the same software every day. Email, web browser, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, perhaps your accounting software, whatever that might be. That is everything I need to do. So why do I need to be able to install software from anywhere in the world and run it? Okay, so application whitelisting, it's a listing of all the applications that are allowed to run. Virus protection software, antivirus software, says this is a software you're not allowed to run. And that worked in the 80s and 90s, but now we really should be thinking strongly about whitelisting, only running applications that we authorize. That's, would solve a whole bunch of problems right there. Keeping your software up to date, so patching applications, so having a patch, updating it. There's a web resource called Patch My PC. I've got links to all the things that you can run. One of the things you want to do there is, am I missing any patches? Particularly difficult for the time when we've been working from home. You sent all these computers home, they were all patched and ready to go, but now they're out of date. Okay? Configure your Office macro settings. It's insane. I love myself a good Microsoft Office macro, but in its default settings, you click on, you get a bit of code and it will just run as soon as you open it up. You must turn off those Office macro settings so that it at least asks for authorization to proceed. Better yet, think about, do you really need an Office macro? Should you be doing that? I know it's invaluable in many circumstances, but the cost and the risk can be quite high. So you should turn those off. Obviously, if you don't run Microsoft Office, then this becomes a moot point, but most people do. Don't install software you don't use. Flash, you should not be using Flash anymore. Having said that, I work for a university that forces you to use Flash to watch university lecture recordings, but still, turn it off until you need it. Block the ads, because ads can be a way to inject bad code. Do you need Java? Disable those features you don't need. Extra web browsers, PDF viewers, all of that stuff that accretes over time, let's delete them. There's a question there, are Macs still considered safe? I'm using a Mac. Yeah, they're safe-ish, still need antivirus, and it's not a guarantee. You can limit cyber attacks in terms of what they do. I should just point out, every one of those 4 things there, no software needs to be purchased, no technology, 85%. That is preventing the attacks. Once an attack has happened, so the 15% that is left, you can then triage a bit. Let's limit the extent. So the 3 things that ASD recommends: restrict admin privileges. So why do I have a laptop that's got full admin? Again, 80% of your people, 90% of the time, statistics I just made up, but it feels right, will be using the same software all the time. Why do you leave them with open admin privileges all the time? At least make sure there's a password to install that software. Make sure you patch the operating system. So patch everybody else's, including your network operating systems, your servers. Keep those up to date so that an attack, if it is successful, can't spread so much. And then multi-factor authentication, which is you're going to use the computer, have something else that authorizes you, authenticates you with the network resources. So fingerprint scanners, some form of smartphone integration, that's what we use. Multi-factor authentication can cost a little bit, but there are options that are free or close to free that will work to give you multi-factor authentication. All that means is you have to type in a password and then you have to show that you are the right person using some other device. So what we have at the University of Queensland is we can be every time we log in, we have to tick on our phone that we've already pre-registered that we are who we say we are. And we have to do that once a week, which is, you know, makes it a little bit harder for the wrong person to get access to your computer systems. So those are three things you can do that are zero or low cost, that will limit the extent of your cybersecurity incidents. And then you can keep an eye out for the things that matter, that will actually show that you're being attacked. Slow internet, staff should be vigilant for phishing attacks. If I receive that dodgy spear phishing, you know, they've harvested your details from LinkedIn. From that, they were able to work out who your boss was. Don't just delete the damn thing. Tell someone that you've been attacked. You've made a list. You've brought attention to yourself. Tell someone. Let someone know that you've got this phishing attack. Mysterious things happening on your computer. That's important. Smartphones. I think my smartphone has 128 gigabytes of data on it. I've got 400 gigabytes on my laptop, so I can fit an awful lot on my hard drive on my smartphone. So, you know, be careful what you do, be careful what apps you download. You are reliant on things like Apple's App Store to say that these programs are valid and good, but still, get rid of stuff that you don't need. Have log-on audit trails. Why was Harry accessing our system at 1 AM, right? Was it really Harry, or is that, you know, prime working time in the sophisticated actor country? There's a question there, use of hardware keys such as YubiKeys or OnlyKey. As I understand it, that would be a multi-factor authentication. You can also set up to block a bunch of dodgy websites. And I have a wayward teenager. Custodio is something I've set up on his laptop. Although he's nearly 18, I probably should get rid of that. But Custodio is something that reports what dodgy websites people have been to. It stops you accessing websites you don't need. Now that sounds a little Big Brother-ish, but you know, it's something to think about, okay? Because that will give you early indicators that something is happening, okay? People are going to the wrong website, or they may have been infected by something. And of course, you can correct things. How do you fix this problem if it does happen? Contingency plan who you're going to call. Have daily offline backups. It's important that your backup is offline so it doesn't get encrypted. And make sure that your backups are working. I once did a review of a very large company, and their backups had not been working for 6 months because the person who did the backups left and no one thought to check. So they weren't formatting the tapes. Obviously, it's a little bit different. So the Data Privacy Act, the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme, the one thing to beware here is it's private data and it's a fine of $2.1 million. There is this TFN rule. I'm getting the wind up from Micheal. There's this TFN rule, the tax file number rule, which applies Data Privacy Act directly to people who look after tax file numbers. So there is a rule that says that if you've got data transaction file tax file numbers, the provisions of the Data Privacy Act can affect you. So that company that was 2 million turnover, in respect of the tax file numbers that they saw, are affected by the Privacy Act, even though they've only got a small turnover. That $3 million turnover does not apply to people with who store and manage tax file numbers. There is a $2.1 million rule, and the Office of the AIC is proposing to increase that to $10 million. This is just the reporting of it, not the breach. It's if you did not report a notifiable data breach, you get fined $10 million. And if you decide to not cooperate, open up your wallet, that's a $12,000 fine. That's a proposal still that has not happened, but that's where they're wanting to go. So we've talked about code item 6, and it feels like we're headed more down the EU path, which is going to be quite expensive. We're worried about personal information and consent. I would see the MyGov ID as definitely a step forward. Not perfect, but a step forward. When you get personal information, there's a definition there as to what it is. It's, can I identify the person from that information? Do you have their consent to use it? How can you use it? Don't share it with other people, and make sure that it's de-identified. So the main thing here, understand how serious harm might occur. There's a risk of serious harm, and with your serious harm, it could be that one person might suffer serious harm. So if there's one person, you have to notify and report the data breach. If there's not serious harm, then you don't have to notify. But for example, the glitch here is you could have 1,000 people who all lose, say, $5 because of your data breach. That's probably not something you have to report. Whereas one person who loses $5,000, you probably do. But we're probably more likely to tighten that over time. So it's best to get your data house in order. Finally, mobile devices and cloud computing create all sorts of problems because I might have a phone, I've got a laptop at work, a laptop at home, I've got a tablet, I've got an old tablet that I gave to my kids. Did I reformat it? Answer, yes, I did. But these have all got access to data, and it's just about everywhere in the cloud, and particularly during the time of COVID, we have a whole bunch of data where people have just put it to Dropbox. The question earlier was, can you store it overseas? What happens there? That's data privacy principle number 8, which says that if it goes overseas, you have to make sure that you follow the same rules in that overseas location, which will be Dropbox, that you would do here. So you can use Dropbox. You can even put private data on Dropbox, but is it being followed, is it being secured in the same way that it would be here? And that will be really interesting to see when there's a test case on that, which is exactly why Microsoft 365 is now all of its data centers, you can have your data kept in Australia. So with this sudden transition, I'm particularly concerned all these machines have gone out to people's desks at home, and they're going to change it and bring it back to when they come back to work. So in Queensland, we're doing that, although that's a day-to-day situation. In Victoria, when lockdown does end, and it will end, those computers come back, get plugged into your local network. Have they been compromised in some way? And so I'd really urge people to make sure they test that. 2 final points, because the question was asked, email security. Should you put data in email? Emails are very notoriously open. It's better to deal with clients with their personal data with some sort of portal where they need to log into your resources via password. So instead of sending a file via email with all the details in it, I would send them a notice saying, hey, it's been updated, and they have to log in and authenticate because it's too easy for emails to be lost or broken. And Dropbox in particular, making sure that you're not putting private data on Dropbox, or if you are, that you're making sure you're doing it in a secure way. They put their data near the Arctic Circle because it's cooler there. That's not quite the spirit of Data Privacy Principle 8. Gavin, I'm going to wrap up there and hand over to you.
Thanks, presentation. We do have Q&A after this, so please keep those questions coming. I now pass over to Drew Fenton to talk about some of the war stories around cyber security. And luckily or unluckily, Drew's computer's not actively working today, so you're not actually able to see his face. So I do apologise for that for those who are wanting to see Drew's face. Drew.
Thank you, Gavin. For everyone who's listening, I'm thinking, what have Greg and Michael, what is their message? My initial thoughts are, let's close our computer, go home, because it's all too hard. I mean, we've got state-based and sophisticated people trying to hack our systems. We live in a computer world of which we can't get out of. What can we do? I also look at the description here of what is our risk profile. When you're in the insurance world, you always look at risk. When I look at accounting firms, I'm saying they're 9 out of 10. They're a high risk profile because of the information that they hold. Tax file numbers, bank accounts, company details, etc. We also, at this point in time, are living in very much a changing world. We're working from home, we're working from coffee shops, so our secure networks we may have at work are all of a sudden compromised. What do? We have a risk profile which in a general sense we understand is high. We look for partners. Who do we look for? Initially, we're looking for, I suggest, a good IT firm that can assist us to understand risk, understand the profile in which we work on, who we deal with, our clients who in many cases are very unsophisticated businesses. We're all lucky here today, we have another partner, CPA Australia, who provide us with good information and good resources to assist us in this. So the question is insurance. My view is insurance in this case is a partner for you in your business. Right, if we were to look to transfer our risk profile via an insurance policy, what does it give you? I'll tell you what it gives you exactly. It gives you a telephone number. That is the most important number I suggest the practice will have. And whatever you do, please write it down on a piece of paper. Because on Monday morning you come in and your computer doesn't work, you most likely don't have the number. Right, let us talk about a little bit about insurance. And Greg and Michael have given you a good understanding of the broader concepts here. What happens if my computer doesn't work? The insurance policy gives you a number you ring, and invariably this will be, of all things, a law firm, a firm of solicitors. How can they help? What they do is they initially talk to you and assess your risk, what has happened, how it's happened, etc. So if we just go through what an insurance policy covers you for, this will give you a little bit of a better idea. The firm of solicitors will guide you through the response process. They understand the privacy obligations and they understand who you've got to report to, etc. So the first thing is they will advise you and make sure you are not breaking the law. They will ask you specifically, who is your IT expert? Oh, it's my brother-in-law. He works for IBM and he does it sort of every second week, but he's in Europe at the moment. They will assess what has happened, whether somebody's asking for ransom, whether your computer just won't work, whatever the situation is. They see, I suggest to you, literally tens of these a week. Your current IT expert might see one a week. The biggest problem we have here is the changing risk profile of those initiating an attack on you. There is a new piece of software being introduced into the world of computers, I suggest to you on probably an hourly basis. So your IT expert may have seen one that was out 3 months ago or 3 years ago, but they're not up to date with the new one. So the solicitors will either say, yes, you have a good IT firm, or B, will put our specialist firm in to assist you to find out what is going on and try and rectify the situation. As noted earlier, the biggest asset your firm has is your reputation. You have access to a public relations firm. They will provide you with the correct messaging to your clients. In some cases, as noted by Michael, you may not have to advise your clients. Our strongest recommendation is you do. Some may recall the Red Cross incident a couple of years ago. They didn't have to, but they got on the front foot and advised all those that had donated blood that they had been hacked, and it was a good PR and their reputation is intact. The communication campaign is can be long and hard. Again, this is communication with government departments, with the Privacy Commissioner, can be with your clients. It may not just be one email, it could be a series of information flows. Again, they can help you there. It also provides you against the protection against identity theft, and also provides expert advice in this area for you. We'll just move on. I did note there was a question earlier on, and I think Michael also mentioned about ransom. The policy does have a provision to pay for ransom. It is not normally a component of any insurance policy, but in some cases it is the only way out. And as Michael suggested, they are very professional, and they'll even give you a payment system. So here I'll just quickly move on, and these are the steps that the response team, led by the firm of solicitors, will go through with you to assist you in scoping what the problem is and how to get out the other side at minimal cost to the firm in relation to money and also time out of action. Remember, there is a business interruption component in the majority of cyber policies, and if your firm has been down, there is compensation available. I think our largest one at the moment is about $150,000 in the profits side. I've been through these for you in these initial discussion, but as I say, there is a liability component if it is envisaged or proven that your systems weren't up to scratch and you have caused a third-party damage. There is a provision there for that liability to be covered. Provision for damage to your systems, hardware and software. The provision of ransomware, public relation expenses, business interruption, and again, those data breach notification costs. I'll give you two claims examples which are a little bit different. Three-partner firm. What happened here was the NextRec had pushed their database out to a third-party provider. The third-party provider was hacked. 5,000 clients' details were lost. What happened was they rang the number, the firm of solicitors appointed an IT forensic firm to assist. The total cost of rectifying that matter was $124,000, including some time down, which and obviously putting the files back together. The second one is, we'll go through this a little bit more comprehensively. Two-partner firm. This is quite common because hackers know that accounting firms deal in money, whether it be with the ATO in relation to tax portals or in relation to possibly payroll distribution from accounting firms, etc. The hacker takes over the communication with the client, redirects tax payable, resultant client paying $20,000 into a fraudulent account. What happened was that the attacker had gained access to the director's office, 365 emails, targeted details of the tax immediately payable for the client. It is also noted they're in that email site for over 90 days. This is quite common. They jump in through however they get there, they sit and wait, understand what is going on. We've seen a number of claims in this area. What happened was that the client found out that the ATO hadn't been paid, so a letter of demand came from the client. Total cost of that claim was $65,000, $30,000 in IT and forensic, cleaning up the system, make sure that they can't get in again, $20,000 in legals, initial assistance, advisory, Privacy Act, notification, etc., and defence costs. Now, at this point in time, there was no monetary loss payable because it was deemed that the client was also to blame here. Just because you get sued doesn't mean that you're liable. So at the end of the day, we got out of that without having to pay the clients $20,000 worth of tax because it was deemed that they were complicit in this. But invariably, if it deemed that they were liable, yes, that $20,000 tax would have also been included in the claim. I'll hand back now to Gavin, but can I just say, the reason we have a professional and good practice is because of our partners, can I say CPA, Tax Practitioners Board, and your insurance company / insurance broker, or in this case also an IT professional services firm, are valuable and invaluable partners in a successful practice. I'll hand back to you now, Gavin.
Thanks, Drew. We'll now shift to some Q&A. There's been a few questions coming through, and some of the people, some of the members on the line have been answering those questions, and we have addressed them as we go through. So maybe I'll just start with some of the questions. So there's a question early on from Derver, and it was, how do you protect client data when internet is a shared connection? So maybe Michael, I don't know if you have a quick response to that.
So to me, and the TFN rule comes into that, but that's where don't send it by email, don't send Dropbox links where that can just be shared around. I would advise strongly that if we're talking to keep it safe, yes, keep it in the cloud, but put it in a place that you can control or at least trust the security, and get the client to use their credentials to access it. So instead of emailing files, which is kind of a, and I know there's a couple of people that are very knowledgeable online here, but I would say to you that that's a way of keeping it in your hands. The data's with you, they log in, and then they can do all that what they want. They can download it if they want to their own systems, but sending it open via the internet, not a great idea. Other things, that's the VPN that I see that keeps coming up in the comments. That's important. One thing we haven't talked about in this world of Zoom actually is, recordings of meetings. So if I record a meeting in Zoom, can I do that? Do I need to get permission from the people that are participating? As I understand it, those laws change state to state. But where do you keep that record? From an internet perspective, VPN will help, and not sending the data out, particularly using email. I mean, you would not use email today. It's not something you'd develop, right? It would be something that you maintain control over, because email is kind of terrible for a whole bunch of reasons. I think that answers the question, so maybe if Gava wants to give us some more, I can go on with that. But the email is the main vector by which data leaves us, and I'd control that relationship.
There's another question from Michael, and I think it's a bit of a Dorothy Dixer. I think he knows the answer already, but he did ask the question, is there a foolproof virus product available? Michael?
The answer to that question is no. And if you put that on if you answer an exam question of mine with no, you'll get 1 mark, but you'll leave 5 marks sitting on the table. With that foolproof antivirus, you want it updated regularly. You definitely want to have antivirus installed, but you can't rely on it 100%. Okay. In combination with something like application whitelisting, you're starting to really closing down the avenues of attack, though.
There's a questions around paying ransom. So obviously it's potentially a sensitive topic. I note that in the Australian government's guidance, they suggest not to pay the ransom.
Hey, Gavin, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, Gavin, was that directed to me?
Yes. Sorry, everyone. I think we just had a bad connection. So the question was about paying a ransom. So there's different schools of thought around whether we should pay a ransom. Are there any negative consequences of paying a ransom?
Well, look, the only negative I think is which Michael has highlighted earlier on, that if you get yourself a good IT consultant in there, they will say that we cannot get out of this, pay the ransom. But on the other side of that, you must change your system to make sure they can't come back next month. Now I did mention they are very honourable. These perpetrators who are asking for the ransom, and as Michael said, they'll help you with Bitcoin. They even have part payments, and in some cases you can even negotiate down the ransom. So look, it's to a certain extent against the law, but provided you make sure you change your system once you get your data back to ensure that they cannot come back again, certainly on the same pathway.
Thank you. Go to the next question. There's a question a question I received from Paula Wise, and it's more around maybe Michael, could you discuss a bit about cloud security? And that's becoming more topical these days. What what you could do to improve cloud security.
Okay, so I see I'm being gazumped in the commentary there in terms of the security, and I can only endorse that commentary. The thing you've got to remember with cloud is you're paying for the accessibility, the convenience, it's wherever you are, and you've got to compare that to, you know, the type of IT infrastructure that you could put in, right? I don't know about you, but my capability to set up a safe, secure system that is more reliable and as accessible is non-existent. I would need quite a bit of resource. I need people who knew what the heck they were doing to set it up if I ran it myself. So you've got to compare the cloud option with how good can you do it yourself. You can't just say cloud is risky, risky, risky. It is improving definitely. And I guess it's a case of you get what you pay for with your cloud. And probably the Microsoft OneDrive, as much as I'm not a big fan of it from a user perspective, I'm sure I'm about to get a comment in the chat, but from a consumer professional organization perspective, I think that one probably at the top of the heap. Your drop boxes are okay, but then yeah, the data goes everywhere, and they have had their own share of breaches. You're better off doing a proper service provider selection, thinking about what you need, where they put their data. Some of the service providers that are less consumer focused and more enterprise ready are ones to really think about. I know that the university uses its own, the universities have put together their own solution, and that's where we put our research data, precisely for the reason it can't go offshore, and because the 32, 38, whatever the number is these days, universities together have the resources to make that work. I don't know how many organisations here are in that spot. I suspect not too many. The question was asked about Toll. You know, if Toll can get hacked, they've got resources. Unfortunately, you can't be 100% safe and secure. It doesn't quite work like that. I think that's probably all I need to say on that, but I'm happy to go further. I just think cloud is, you've got to compare it with the right things. Horses for courses, exactly.
I agree. Maybe this question is for Greg. I think Greg got audio again. It's a question for Roger. And he asks, it's all more of a comment than anything else. When he contacts the ATA identification, but when they contact him, they seem to when he report on services or agents. Greg, any sort of tips from your perspective and TPB's perspective around how to handle queries from the ATO come to you rather than contacting the ATO?
Good question, Gavin. I hope you can hear me. I think my internet connection, thank you for the thumbs up. Gotta love Zoom now. It's all about hand signals. It's a new sign language for communicating. Look, it's a really good question, because my first comment to the practitioner is, well, if you don't know who you're talking to, you don't give any information to them because they are a third party, and thinking about the code of conduct, but more importantly, unless you can confirm who they are. I mean, I could bring up someone on the webinar today and say, I'm Greg from the ATO, and you know, they might believe me straight away if I'm believable. But in that regard, first comment is, if they can't prove who they are and you're not comfortable, there is a number you can ring at the ATO, and I might try and get Madeline to share that at the end of the session, Gavin, where you can ring up separately and identify, is Greg Lewis a officer employed at the ATO separately, so you can get separate confirmation. If the person from the ATO is quite angry with you, well, look, if you want to, you can say, well, at the end of the day, you've got confidentiality obligations. And I've had this discussion with the ATO, I think with you, Gavin. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. The pro ATO people are trying to do the right thing on the phone, but then you've got a confidentiality obligation. And the problem is, people are very good at impersonating other people. I've actually had a phone call from someone out of Adelaide who impersonated to be an official from the ATO and demanded $20,000 from me. And I kept them on the phone and said, oh, could we have a meeting? And, yeah, it was found out to be a group out of Adelaide. I tried to confirm who they were, and they kept coming up with a badge number. And I said, well, no one has a badge number. I'll look you up on the screen. And then they started to get a bit nervous. So a long answer, but you can't confirm who they are. Go onto the ATO website, ring their number and confirm the person. Back to you, Gavin.
Thanks. That's an issue that comes up regularly as well, understandably so. There was a comment around, there's a comment from Emily around thoughts around, well, what's about public Wi-Fi, but there was a question around wanting their clients or giving their clients access to Wi-Fi, give a client service. Do you have any sort of comments on that, Michael, whether it's good, bad, and how to actually do it safely?
Okay, so I'm a big fan of looking after clients. I was in public practice for a long time, and the more that you look after them, excellent. I would not be putting them onto my Wi-Fi. I would be having a guest Wi-Fi, and that should be kept completely separate on the other side of the router/firewall, so that all they're getting is Wi-Fi, access to the internet, and not access to your internals, unless they are authorizing as if they were from the internet. But I would have a separate guest Wi-Fi. It's probably expected now, I would think, but I wouldn't just be giving them your password to the internal Wi-Fi, because that's not a great thing to do.
Thank you. That's my last question. So, and thank you to people and some of the members like Tyler for answering many of the questions, but there was a question around how secure and safe is some of the Microsoft-based platforms like SharePoint, Dynamics 365. What's your view, Michael, on how safe they are?
Okay, so I'm not an expert on that. However, what I'm going to say is, Microsoft is still pretty big in that space. B, I know that the university here did a massive review and we went boots and all on Microsoft. I'm not a massive fan of SharePoint by any means, but it's as enterprise ready as anything for the price you're going to get. If you go somewhere else to do that kind of thing, you'd probably need to scale up how much you're prepared to pay. So I would, yes, endorse doing a proper review. I think Microsoft's platform is as good as any. I'm not a massive fan of SharePoint, or OneDrive for that matter, for a couple of user reasons. They don't play well with Macs. But in terms of the security, I'm not conscious of major problems that would be any different to a lot of the other providers. I know we've got in there comments around Google is the opposite of secure and private, and you know, Google is really a consumer product that's had some lipstick put on it and brought it up to enterprise. And it kind of works, but it kind of doesn't. And there are some other options, but you start, you know, heading into IBM type territory, and that starts requiring checkbooks that I certainly don't have. I think Microsoft, you know, it's kind of, back in the olden days, back when I were a lad, you know, no one got fired for buying IBM. No one got fired for running with the Microsoft platform, the suite. It's got a lot of use and a lot of presence. So if there were problems, you'll hear about it more quickly. So there is that going for it. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get sued by Microsoft.
Thanks, Michael. And I have seen your comments on SharePoint on Twitter, so you're very calm in relation to what you said on Twitter about SharePoint.
What stays on Twitter, you should stay there.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening in today. There are additional resources, links to additional resources in the slide pack in the PowerPoint, and I do encourage you to use those. Please join me in thanking our three presenters, Greg Lewis, Micheal Axelsen, and Drew Fenton. Thank you so much. I think it was an excellent presentation by the three of you.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks, Gavin.
And I'll pass back to Arjun to finish the presentation.
Thanks very much, Gavin, and I'd like to echo that too. Thank you to all our presenters for the wonderful webinar, as well as our chat box hosts who kept all the questions answered throughout the session. Thank you to everyone else for your participation and your attendance today. Those questions really do make it nice and interactive. If you are ready to leave us now, that does conclude today's webinar. You can click on the cross on the top right of your screen to exit the webinar. As you exit, you will be redirected to a feedback form. Prior to that, you'll reach an external site message. You are safe to continue past this external site message as it does go to one of our own Kahoot Learning Safe websites. Feedback only takes about 30 seconds to fill out. It's definitely reviewed and it's definitely beneficial for CPA Australia as well as our whole panel today. A recording of today's webinars will also be available within 48 hours. Thanks again, everyone. That does bring us to a close. Have a very good afternoon.